Hello everyone, welcome. Today we are going to learn a short story, The Ant and the Grasshopper, written by William Somerset Maugham. So let's begin the story. When I was a very small boy, I was made to learn by heart certain of the fables of La Fontaine, and the moral of each was carefully explained to me. Among those I learnt was the ant and the grasshopper, which is devised to bring home to to the young the useful lesson that in an imperfect world, industry is rewarded and giddiness punished. In this admirable fable, and I apologize for telling something which everyone is politely but inexactly supposed to know. The ant spends a laborious summer gathering its winter store, while the grasshopper sits on the blade of grass singing to the sun. Winter comes and the ant is comfortably provided for, but the grasshopper has an empty larder. He goes to the ant and begs for a little food. Then the ant gives him her classic answer: "What were you doing in the summertime? Saving your presence. I sang all day, all night. You sang? Why then you go and dance?" I do not ascribe it to the perversity on my part, but rather to inconsequences of childhood, which is deficient in moral sense, that I could never quite reconcile myself to the lesson. My sympathies were with the grasshopper, and for some time I never saw an ant without putting my foot on it. In this summary, and as I have discovered since, entirely human fashion, I sought to express my disapproval of prudence and common sense. I could not help thinking of this fable when the other day I saw George Ramsay lunching by himself in a restaurant. I never saw anyone wear an expression of such deep gloom. He was staring into space. He looked as though the burden of the whole world sat on his shoulders. I was sorry for him. I suspected at once that his unfortunate brother had been causing trouble again. I went up to him and held out my hands. "How are you?" I asked. "I am not in hilarious spirit," he answered. "Is it Tom again?" I sighed. "Yes, it's Tom again." "Why don't you check him? You have done everything in the world for him. You must know by now that he is quite hopeless. I suppose every family has a black sheep. Tom had been a sore trial for 20 years. He had begun his life decently enough. He went into business, married, and had two children. The Ramsay were perfectly respectable people, and there was every reason to suppose that Tom Ramsay would have a useful and honorable career. But one day, without warning, Tom Ramsay announced that he did not like work and that he wasn't suited for marriage. He wanted to enjoy himself. He he would listen to no one and no expostulations. He left his wife and his office. He had a little money and he spent 2 happy years in the various capitals of Europe. Rumors of his doings reached his relations from time to time, and they were profoundly shocked. He certainly had a very good time. They shook their heads and asked what would happen when his money was spent. They soon found out. He borrowed. Tom Ramsay borrowed. He was charming and unscrupulous. I have never met anyone to whom it was more difficult to refuse a loan. He made a steady income from his friends and he met friends very easily. But he always said that the money you spent on the necessities was boring. The money that was amusing to spend was the money you spent on luxuries. For this, he depended on his brother George. He did not waste his charm on him. George was a serious man and insensible to such enticement. George was respectable. Once or twice he fell to Tom's promises of amendment and gave him considerable sums in order to in order that he might make a fresh start. On these, Tom brought a motor car and some very nice jewelry. But when circumstances forced George to realize that his brother would never settle down and he washed his hand on him, Tom, without a qualm, began to blackmail him. It was not very nice for a respectable lawyer to find his brother shaking cocktails behind the bars of his favorite restaurant or to see him waiting on the box seat of the taxi outside his club. Tom said that to serve in a bar or to drive a taxi was a perfectly decent occupation. But if George could oblige him with a couple of £100, he did not mind for honor of his family giving it up. George paid. Once Tom nearly went to the prison. George was terribly upset. He went into the hole in this discreditable affair. Really, Tom had gone too far. He had been wild, thoughtless, and selfish, but he had never before done anything dishonest, by which George meant illegal. And if he were prosecuted, he would assuredly be convicted. But you cannot allow your only brother to go to a gaol. The man Tom had cheated, a man called Cronshaw, was vindictive. He was determined to take the matter into court. He said Tom was a scoundrel and should be punished. It cost George an infinite deal of trouble and £500 to settle the affair. I have never seen him in such a rage as when he heard that Tom and Cronshaw had gone off together to Monte Carlo the moment they cashed the check. They spent a happy month there. For 20 years, Tom raced and gambled, philandered with the prettiest girl, danced, ate in the most expensive restaurants, and dressed beautifully. He always looked as if he had just stepped out of the bandel box, bandbox. Though he was 46, you would never have taken him for more than 35. He was more he was most amusing companion, and though you knew him, he was a perfectly worthless. You could not but enjoy his society. He had high spirits, an unfailing gaiety, an incredible charm. I never judged the contribution he regularly levied on me for necessities of his existence. I never lent him £50 without feeling that I was in his debt. Tom Ramsay knew everyone, and everyone knew Tom Ramsay. You could not approve of him, but you could not help liking him. Poor George. Poor George, only a year older than his scapegrace brother, looked 60. He had never taken more than a fortnight holiday in a year for a quarter of a century. He was in his office every morning at 9:30 and never left it till 6. He was honest, industrious, and worthy. He had a good wife to whom he had never been unfaithful, even in his thought, and four daughters to whom he was the best of the father. He made a point of saving a third of his income, and his plan was to retire at 55 to a little house in country where he proposed to cultivate his garden and to play golf. His life was blameless. He was glad that he was growing old because Tom was growing old too. He rubbed his hands and said, "It was all very well when Tom was young and good looking, but he is only a year younger than I am. In 4 years, he will be 50. He won't find life so easy then. I shall have £30,000 by the time I am 50. For 25 years, I have said that the Tom would end in the gutter, and we shall see how he likes that. We shall see if it really pays best to work on be a idle. Be an idol. Poor George. I sympathized with him. I wondered, now as I sat down beside him, what infamous thing Tom had done. George was evidently very much upset. "Do you know what happened now?" he asked me. I was prepared for the worst. I wondered if Tom had gone into hands of the police at last. George could hardly bring himself to speak. "You are not going to deny that all my life I have been hardworking, decent, respectable, and straightforward. After a life of industry and thrift, I can look forward to retiring on the small income in the gilt edged security. I have always done my duty in that state of life in which it has pleased Providence to place me. True. And you cannot deny that Tom had been an idle, worthless, dissolute, and dishonorable rogue. If there were any justice, he would be in the workhouse. True. George grew red in the face. A few weeks ago, he became engaged to a woman old enough to be his mother, and now she is died. She has died and left him everything she had. £500,000, a yacht, a house in London, and house in the country. George Ramsay beat his clenched fist on the table. "It's not fair. I tell you, it's not fair. Damn it, it's not fair." I could not help it. I burst into a shout of laughter as I looked at the George's wrathful face. I rolled in my chair. I very nearly fell on the floor. George never forgave me, but Tom often asked me to excellent dinners in his charming house in Mayfair, and if he occasionally borrows a trifle from me, that is merely from force of habit. It is never more than a sovereign. So that was the story. Thank you so much for listening.